The story begins in the vast, sun-scorched stretches of Oklahoma, where the red earth meets endless sky and the wind carries whispers of both hardship and hope. It was 1918, and James Mackenzie was a wildcatter, an oil prospector who spent his days drilling exploratory wells in search of black gold. Unlike the corporate oil barons of his time, James was an independent operator, a man who believed in honest work and fair dealings, even when the world around him operated on greed and exploitation. James had been drilling on what he believed to be unclaimed land near the borders of Apache territory. The work was backbreaking, the conditions brutal, and the chances of striking oil were slim. But James was nothing if not persistent. Day after day, his small crew worked the rig, boring deeper into the earth, hoping that this would be the well that changed their fortunes. The Oklahoma landscape stretched endlessly around them, a tableau of red dirt, scrub brush, and relentless sun that beat down on their backs as they labored. Then, on a sweltering August afternoon, it happened. The ground began to rumble, and suddenly, a geyser of crude oil shot into the sky, black and beautiful against the blue Oklahoma backdrop. James and his crew stood in stunned silence before erupting in celebration. They had done it. They had struck oil, and from the looks of it, this was no small find. This was the kind of deposit that could make a man wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. The crude came up thick and fast, promising reserves that could produce for decades. Word of the strike spread quickly, as such news always does in oil country. Within days, land speculators, lawyers, and oil company representatives descended on the site like vultures circling a carcass. They came with contracts, cash offers, and promises of riches. Some offered partnership deals. Others wanted to buy him out entirely. The amounts being discussed were staggering. More money than James had ever imagined possessing in his entire lifetime. But as James began to survey the land more carefully and consult proper records at the county office, a troubling truth emerged. The land he had been drilling on wasn't unclaimed at all. Through a series of confusing land surveys and poorly marked boundaries, he had inadvertently drilled on Apache tribal land. The revelation hit James like a physical blow. He spent a sleepless night poring over maps and deeds by lamplight, hoping to find some error, some loophole that would make the discovery rightfully his. But the evidence was clear and unmistakable. His well sat squarely on land that had been granted to the Apache people through federal treaty. He could have hidden this information. In that era, Native American land rights were routinely ignored or trampled by settlers, corporations, and even government officials. The legal protections for tribal lands were weak and poorly enforced. Many men in James's position would have simply claimed ignorance, forged ahead with production, and let the lawyers sort it out later, if the tribe even had the resources to mount a legal challenge. The temptation was enormous. James had a wife and 2 young children. He had been scraping by for years, taking on debt to finance his drilling operations, gambling everything on the hope of a big strike. This oil well represented not just wealth but security, education for his children, a comfortable life for his aging parents, and respect in a society that measured a man's worth by his financial success. Walking away from it would mean returning to uncertainty, to the constant struggle to make ends meet, to the very real possibility that he might never get another chance like this. But James Mackenzie was not that kind of man. He had been raised by parents who taught him that a person's character was defined not by what they did when others were watching, but by what they did when no one would ever know. His father, a simple farmer, had once told him that a man who compromises his integrity for money will eventually have neither. Those words echoed in his mind as he wrestled with his decision. He thought of his own family, of how he would feel if someone had taken something precious from them through deceit or legal manipulation. He imagined his children growing up knowing that their comfort came from stolen wealth, and the thought made him ill. So James made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He shut down the well, packed up his equipment, and sought out the Apache tribal leaders. His business partners thought he had lost his mind. His investors threatened lawsuits. Even his own wife, though she ultimately supported him, wept at the financial sacrifice they were making. But James was resolute. He had made up his mind, and nothing would change it. The meeting took place under a sprawling cottonwood tree on the edge of the reservation. James came alone, without lawyers or armed escorts, carrying only the drilling records and land surveys that proved what he had found. It was a gesture of vulnerability and trust that did not go unnoticed. The Apache had grown accustomed to white men arriving with armed guards and legal documents designed to confuse and intimidate. Through an interpreter, James explained the situation to Chief Naich and the tribal council. He told them about the oil, about its potential value, and about his mistake in drilling on their land. He laid out all the documentation and told them plainly that the oil belonged to them, not to him. He explained exactly how much the deposit might be worth, holding nothing back. He asked for nothing in return except their forgiveness for his trespass, though he made clear it had been unintentional. The Apache leaders listened in silence, their weathered faces revealing nothing. They had every reason to be suspicious. Their history with white prospectors and settlers was one of broken promises, stolen land, and betrayal. Time and again, they had been told one thing only to have something else happen. Treaties had been signed and broken. Land had been promised and then taken. Resources on their reservations had been exploited by unscrupulous operators who used legal technicalities to rob them blind. Yet here was this wildcatter, voluntarily walking away from a fortune, asking for nothing but their understanding. Chief Naich finally spoke, his words measured and heavy with significance. He told James that the Apache people had learned to expect treachery from outsiders, but that James's honesty was a rare gift in a world that seemed to have forgotten the meaning of honor. He said that such integrity deserved to be honored, not forgotten. He spoke of how the Apache valued truth and character above all material possessions, and how James had demonstrated both qualities in abundance. The chief acknowledged that legally, James probably could have proceeded with production and tied the matter up in courts for years, enriching himself while the tribe fought an uphill legal battle with limited resources. The fact that he had chosen a different path spoke volumes about his character. With that, James shook hands with each council member, mounted his horse, and rode away from the richest oil strike he would ever find. As he rode back to his modest home, he felt simultaneously lighter and heavier. Lighter because his conscience was clear, heavier because he knew the hard years ahead that his decision had guaranteed. James returned to his modest life, taking on smaller drilling contracts and barely scraping by. The years that followed were difficult. The oil boom made millionaires of many men, but James was not among them. He watched former colleagues build mansions while he struggled to maintain his small farmhouse. He saw men with far less skill and far more ruthlessness grow wealthy while he remained firmly in the working class. He married, had children, and worked hard to provide for them, but he never struck it rich. Sometimes, in his darker moments, he wondered if he had been a fool to walk away from that Apache land. The weight of his decision pressed on him during the lean times, when money was tight and opportunities were scarce. But whenever doubt crept in, he would remember the look in Chief Naich's eyes and know that he had made the right choice. He would hold his children and know that he could look them in the eye and tell them that their father was an honest man. 7 years passed. 7 long years of work and struggle, of watching other men get rich from Oklahoma oil while he remained in modest circumstances. His drilling ventures had been marginally successful, enough to keep food on the table but never enough to get ahead. His children were growing, and he worried about being able to afford to send them to school. His wife had taken in sewing to help make ends meet. Life was hard, but it was honest, and James took comfort in that. Then, one autumn morning in 1925, there was a knock on the door of James's modest farmhouse. When he opened it, he found himself face to face with 3 Apache men, including one of the council members who had been present at that meeting under the cottonwood tree 7 years earlier. They were dressed in a mixture of traditional and contemporary clothing, and their faces were serious but not unfriendly. They had traveled for 2 days to find him. James invited them in, offering what hospitality his humble home could provide. What they told him seemed impossible, like something from a dream. The Apache tribe had indeed developed the oil field that James had discovered. With the help of honest lawyers and business partners, carefully vetted to avoid the exploitation that had plagued so many tribal resources, they had turned that single well into a productive operation. The oil had brought unprecedented prosperity to the tribe, funding schools, hospitals, and infrastructure that had transformed life on the reservation. Children who might have grown up illiterate now had access to quality education. Medical care that had been non-existent was now available. The tribe had used the wealth wisely, investing in their future while maintaining their cultural identity. But the tribe had not forgotten the wildcatter who had walked away from a fortune to do the right thing. The council had voted unanimously on a decision. They wanted to grant James a percentage of the oil revenues as recognition for his honesty and integrity. It wasn't charity, they explained. It was justice. He had discovered the oil, and while the land was rightfully theirs, his character deserved to be rewarded. They had discussed the matter extensively, consulting with elders and considering their own values and traditions. In the Apache way, such extraordinary integrity created an obligation, a debt of honor that needed to be paid. James tried to refuse. He stammered that he had only done what was right, that he deserved nothing. He hadn't done it expecting reward, he told them. He had simply tried to be an honest man. But the Apache representatives were insistent. This was not a gift, they told him. It was a payment for a debt of honor. In their culture, integrity was the highest value, and it demanded recognition. To refuse would be to dishonor their decision and their gratitude. They explained that they had watched him over the years, discreetly checking on his circumstances, wanting to act at the right time and in the right way. The amount they offered was not the full fortune James might have claimed 7 years earlier, but it was substantial, enough to secure his family's future, pay off his debts, and live comfortably for the rest of his life. More importantly, the tribe offered him something that no amount of money could buy: a formal adoption into the Apache Nation, making him an honorary member of the tribe with all the respect and belonging that entailed. They presented him with traditional items of clothing and told him that he would always have a home among them. James accepted, tears streaming down his weathered face. In the years that followed, he became a regular visitor to the reservation, where he was welcomed not as an outsider but as family. His children grew up learning Apache traditions alongside their own heritage, creating a bridge between cultures that enriched both families immeasurably. James used his newfound resources not for luxury but for meaningful purposes. He helped other independent wildcatters get started, he supported educational initiatives, and he worked quietly to promote fair dealings between oil operators and tribal communities throughout Oklahoma. When James finally passed away in 1947, he was buried with full Apache honors, a rare distinction for someone not born into the tribe. Both his biological family and his Apache family mourned him, and his funeral brought together people from all walks of life who had been touched by his example. The story of James Mackenzie and the Apache oil became a legend, passed down through generations on both sides. It stands as a powerful reminder that integrity, even when it costs us dearly, is never truly wasted. In a world that often rewards ruthlessness and exploitation, James chose honor over wealth, and in the end, he received both. But more importantly, he earned something far more valuable: the respect of people he had wronged, the knowledge that he had lived according to his deepest values, and a legacy that would inspire others long after he was gone.